Hello and welcome to the WeatherWorks educational webinar series, Make the Weather Work for You. My name is Nathan Wiles, lead meteorologist and assistant marketing director of the company. Today we'll set our eyes on the eastern seaboard and discuss the impacts of coastal flooding and examine a few key ingredients that can help you better prepare for the rising waters ahead. Our presenter today is meteorologist Joe Martucci of the Press of Atlantic City and Longport Media. Joe has spent the last 4 years providing daily weather forecasts and media coverage to southern New Jersey. He's also a former WeatherWorks employee of 4 years and holds his meteorology degree from Rutgers University. Joe, the floor is yours.
Nate, thanks so much. And, it's good seeing you too, kind of in person here. We had a little video chat beforehand. And thank you to everybody here who's attending this coastal flooding seminar. We'll just jump right into it here and show you what we're going to cover here over the next 25 to 30 minutes or so. We'll talk about what is, and more importantly, maybe what isn't coastal flooding. We're going to talk about the increases that we've seen in coastal flooding, what forms coastal flooding, how you can find your forecast if you're along the seaboard, or if you're even anywhere that's a tidal river area. You think about the Delaware River south of Trenton, that's one spot that you could also find these tidal forecasts for, and how to save money on your town's flood insurance. So if you're involved in local government, that last part will definitely be for you. So, sea levels are rising. That is a fact. Now, it's mostly due to greenhouse gas increasing greenhouse gases, but there's also other factors at play. Things like infrastructure. Our shores have a lot of buildup. They're almost as dense as some cities. That plays a role into this. Also, the fact that our land is naturally sinking in some parts of the mid-Atlantic, specifically in New Jersey. That all plays a role as well. We take a look at the frequency of flooding along the U.S. coast in our past decade as opposed to the 50s and 60s. You can't necessarily see what the numbers are for each spot, but you see that purple bar, and it's a lot higher than those orange bars in many spots, especially in Lewis, Delaware, Atlantic City, Sandy Hook, Philadelphia, Baltimore. Waters have risen in Atlantic City. They've risen in Boston. They've risen in Norfolk. I'm going to use those three cities as reference points throughout this presentation. And you might say, look, 0.23 inches a year, that's not a lot of increase. Well, no, in and of itself, it's not. But you talk about 10 years, talking about maybe 2-inch increase. And then over time, we're expecting this to increase more rapidly. And we have seen it increase more rapidly. So it is a problem. In fact, when we look at the frequency of coastal flooding, we've seen an increase already, and we are projected to see an even bigger increase in the next 10 years. I want to show you something that's actually going to happen within many of our lifetimes here. So again, my name's Joe. I'm a meteorologist here at the Press of Atlantic City. I am born and raised in New Jersey. I do radio for Longport Media. My full-time job is here at the Press of Atlantic City. Before I was here at the Press, as Nate said, I was a WeatherWorks meteorologist. I think I look about the same, give it about 4 years or so since I did leave WeatherWorks. Met some great people there. And I'll tell you what, it kind of feels like I got a second degree in meteorology, given how much expertise and knowledge all the meteorologists have at WeatherWorks that was passed down to me. So you're definitely in good hands here, if you do have WeatherWorks as one of your weather service providers. If you want to give me a follow on social media, please do. We have a lot of fun there. We are going to be talking about everything from the beach forecast to climate info to other stories that I post. And, my day, the way I like to describe, my day is I do a little bit of everything. Wherever you need weather information, there's a way I'm getting it to you. So whether it's through videos, writing, even social media and podcasts, it's there for you. It's 2021. You're not going to just one place for your local weather information. Neither am I even, just as a consumer of weather information too. So you want to make sure you're in all places. And that's why I think this job here at the Press is so unique and such a long-lasting, or I should say position. I think it's going to be around for the long term, working at these kind of organizations. Just to give you a little brief update of where we cover, it's southeastern New Jersey. What you see shaded in green is the New Jersey Pine Barrens, a sparse but ecologically rich area. Very unique here, not only in New Jersey, but across the world. It's famous for, well, as it says in the name, it's pine barrens and some very rare species of pine barrens. But we cover anywhere from Cape May on up to Long Beach Island, if you're familiar with New Jersey, then out west a little bit. We don't get exactly into the Philadelphia suburbs. So let's talk about what tidal flooding is. It's dry land being submerged by water. But the one misconception that everybody tells me all the time, and I want to just debunk this right off the top, is it's not caused by rain, or at least by rain directly. Rain could exaggerate flooding issues, but heavy rain alone is not going to cause coastal flooding. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Tidal flooding is temporary. It's not a part of the rising tides that we've seen already. So here's a look at our coastal flood stages. There's 3 stages that are uniform across the National Weather Service, and what you'll see WeatherWorks talk about, and what I would talk about too. We have your minor flood stage on the left. You're not going to want to drive through that, but it's not really a big deal. Your moderate flood stage, and that's me in Atlantic City back with our nor'easter at the end of January and early February. If you live not in South Jersey, you remember that for a lot of snow. We barely even saw snow with this, but we got a lot of coastal flooding. That's when you start to see your homes and businesses that aren't raised get water. And then on the right, that's actually a house down in Cape May County. That's like half submerged with water. That's major property loss here. Minor flood stage happens pretty frequently. Depending on where you are, it happens more frequent than other places. In Atlantic City, I like to say this is the typical kind of flooding we see about 24 times a year. What I will say for everybody is that those moderate and major flood stages remain pretty consistent for everywhere. Moderate, something you are going to see a couple times a year. It's pretty much a guarantee. Major flood stage is not a guarantee, thankfully. That's something that really is storm dependent. So when we look at the tides, there's a bunch of acronyms and a bunch of water levels that we need to explain. There's mean lower low water, or mean lower water. You can use both interchangeably. Mean higher high water, and the highest astronomical tide. So we have this tidal datum on the left. This is really, really helpful because it helps to understand a lot about what's happening with our tide. So the mean lower water is the average low tide throughout the year. The mean higher high water is pretty much the opposite, the average high tide throughout the year. And then we have the highest astronomical tide, which is the highest tide ever recorded without the influence of weather factors. It's just strictly based on just the regular tides that we would see if winds were calm and the sun was out and there was no high or low pressure system anywhere nearby. So here are the weather ingredients that make coastal flooding actually happen. Onshore winds. Now, onshore winds can differ depending on where you are. For us here in New Jersey, it's an east to northeast to north-northeast wind for most of the shore, but look at that blue area along what is the Delaware Bay and even Chesapeake Bay. An east to southeast wind is going to bring conditions most conducive for coastal flooding. If you're on Long Island, it's an east-southeast to a northeast wind. So it does depend depending on where you are. But generally, you want some kind of onshore to push that water up. And, you need the onshore winds to be from a long duration. At least 150 miles of that onshore wind will usually get you into minor flood stage at least. You want a long fetch. Again, that's what we were just kind of saying before. You want those winds blowing for a long period of time, and you want them to be strong. Sustained winds over 15 miles an hour. Again, probably will do the trick in the new and full moon. So what didn't I say here? I didn't say rain. Rain, again, has no influence on this. Look at this picture. This was from last year. This is in southern New Jersey. The sun's shining, but you got water on the ground. And we say it all the time. If you see flooded water, turn around, don't drown, because you don't know how high that water is. And here's the other thing. Even if you're like, okay, I got a pickup truck, I can run through this. Okay, maybe you can, but it's salt water, and it's going to corrode your car, and that's not good either. Let's talk about the moon cycle's influence on this. The new and the full moons will bring your highest tides. They're called the spring tides because they spring up. They spring higher than normal. If tides are naturally higher, there's going to be a higher coastal flooding threat. So around the full and the new moon, we're always looking, okay, do we have a little bit of an onshore wind? Because if you're at a full moon and you even have a weak easterly wind, you're going to get pretty close to minor flood stage. If your winds are 15 miles an hour sustained or more from the onshore direction, you're going to have some kind of coastal flooding. As we look at the spring tides in a little more detail, it's actually based on the proximity to Earth. So not every full and new moon are created equally when it comes to our high tides here. So a full or new moon at perigee will have some of the highest tides of the year. So again, you still have to compare them. Let me give you an example of this year. So let's look at Atlantic City. Here's a tide height for a full moon on May 26th, 5.6 feet. Flood stage is 6 feet. Look what happens in December, 4.5 feet. We have a spring tide here. We're at perigee. during May, and that's why our tides are higher during that time. So not every full and new moon is created equally. In fact, there's something called the king tide, which is not a scientific term, but it does the job here at explaining what's happening. It is the highest, or we'll say the two highest tides of the year, depending on how you want to define it. But it happens during the spring and the fall. And that in and of itself could bring minor flooding without any weather conditions. This is just if not only the Earth is close to the moon, but closer to the sun as well, because that has an influence. Typically, the fall one is going to be higher than the spring, but it's not a guarantee. So we need to know how we're going to find out about this coastal flooding, right? Because I can tell you everything you need to know about coastal flooding, but if you don't know when it's going to happen, well, that's not good. So let's talk about the storm surge guidance. So it's a combination of using models, individual point guidance, and predicted tide heights from these two different places, National Weather Service and Stevens Institute. Two things that I actually learned from WeatherWorks and I still use to this day is the extratropical surge, ET, extratropical, and the Estos, I think I'm saying that right, Atlantic model. Both of them use the GFS model, which is the American model here, but they differ in some of their algorithms or those long math equations that many of us probably sat through calculus. If you were taking calculus, what the heck is this? Well, it all goes into something like what we're talking about right now. So let's look at the ESTOFS Atlantic model here. This is an image of it on the bottom. You can see what happens at the present time, 1 hour, 1 hour out, 2 hours out, etc., and etc. Where you're seeing those yellows and oranges is where you're seeing higher tides as a result of weather conditions. Same thing here for the extratropical surge model. It's a variation of something called the slosh model, which has been around, I think, since like the 70s or 80s. It's been around for a very long period of time. Probably some of this is outdated, but it's still a very good reference for us, and it does show you very specific, or I should say pretty specific details here about where the flooding could be here. We're going to show you some more powerful tools a little bit at the end here. Let's see if we can get this over to the next slide. Here we go. Also look at the individual point guidance. This is going to be great if you live very close to these tide points. So I don't know if you can see, this might be a little small, but we're looking right now at Atlantic City, Cape May, Lewis, Delaware, Ocean City, Maryland. This chart at the bottom is what you get when you click on it. It incorporates both the surge guidance, so what's happening with the weather, and the natural tide heights, what's happening with the sun, the moon, and the earth, to put out a forecast height for these individual locations. But it's only taken from the GFS model. So this is only as good as the model is. This isn't gospel. And if the GFS is way off, well, the flooding forecast is going to be way off. But it is still a good tool to use. Here's a list at what all of those lines mean. Really, what you want to look for is the observation, which is in red. You want to compare that to the total water guidance, which is in black. So, if you're looking here, you see that red line is a little bit higher than that black line. Means that it's actually what's actually happening is higher than what's forecasted. And you can use that tool as you go forward in time here, as you get to 5 or 6 feet, 7 feet of flood stage, to say, hey, you know what, the forecast is saying 5.8 feet of flood stage, but given that we're a little bit higher, I'm going to say, you know what, we're going to get to 6 feet in Atlantic City, which is actually flood stage. Then we have Stevens Institute. This is probably the most useful one because there's more points, and it gives you an ensemble or a range of scenarios. So you can kind of prepare for pretty much what really anything could happen during that tidal flood. So, or not tidal flood. So how to do it, let me just go back here. Once you get to the website, and I have a link to this website at the end here, you're going to click on your location. You're going to make sure you set your date up to MLLW. That's mean lower low water. You can also set it to mean higher high water, but usually I think mean lower low water is where you're seeing a lot of these forecasts from NOAA and the National Weather Service based off of, as opposed to the mean higher high water. Once there, where you're seeing those gray areas, that's the range of possibility. That's from the 5% to 95% likelihood. So it's really covering a wide range, and it gives you an idea, of what really is possible. So for this chart right here, you're looking across, the grays aren't even in that minor flood stage. So you can rest easy knowing that you're going to be okay here. Then we go to the National Weather Service. You can select, there's only a select number of forecasts, but what's great about this is that there's a lot of places that show observations. So the observations are in those circles, the forecasts are in those squares, and the forecast areas also show the observations. So if you're trying to find a specific location near you, you can go to that website and you can click and point to exactly the place that you're looking for. And at the very least, it will give you a tidal observation, or at least a water level observation. It doesn't have to be exactly for coastal flooding. It can be for rivers that are not tidal as well. When the National Weather Service does issue a coastal flood advisory, a coastal flood warning, or a coastal flood watch here, there's differences between the two. And, I try to debunk this as much as I can. A watch and a warning are kind of in two separate silos. Going from a watch to a warning is not an upgrade. Going from a warning to a watch is not a downgrade, because that's actually not possible. What happens is, if there's going to be flooding, and there's a high degree of certainty that there will, and it's moderate flood stage or greater, the National Weather Service will issue a flood watch. That's just to prepare for flooding conditions. When the flooding is imminent, and again, if we're talking about moderate flood stage or greater, we'll go into a flood warning. So where does advisory come in? Well, advisory is usually issued closer to the time of it actually happening. It's usually for when it's in minor flood stage. So advisory, minor flood stage, flood warning, moderate or major. Now, going from an advisory to a warning is an upgrade, and going from a warning to an advisory is a downgrade here. Of course, we could forecast the coastal flooding. We could know everything we need to know about tide heights, but if it's still getting into your town or it's getting onto your property, you want to make sure you can deal with it. And at the town level, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, offers programs to help you at least prepare for the coastal flooding, or at least the economic effects of the coastal flooding through the National Flood Insurance Program. There's 23,000 participating communities. And look at this map to the left. Look at where the majority of them are in terms of those reds and those blacks. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. A lot of the areas that you're probably listening from right now. That's the properties with 2 or more claims by the National Flood Insurance Program between 1978 to 2013. It floods a lot here. And it's not only that, it floods a lot in spaces where there's a lot of people. Look at Florida, another example where there's a lot of people along the coast, and there's a lot of coastal flooding there as well. The hardest hit areas is right along the Gulf Coast, where there still is population, and the land levels, the elevation is very flat. It's and it's flat for miles inland. Most of the places here in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, they tend to get up to 50 feet or 100 feet pretty quickly. That's not the case when you're in Louisiana, Texas, getting into Mississippi and Alabama. They could be at 5, 6, 7 feet for miles inland, and that could be a problem. You can go to floodsmart.gov/find to see more information about what insurance programs you can get. So how do we save the money? That's the all-important question. Well, it's something called the community rating system. Now, in my work here at the Press, a lot of what I do outside of the forecast is revolving around emergency management and writing and doing videos about what's happening with these flood insurance programs. What towns are getting these increases in flood insurance discounts? Because it not only saves the homeowners money, which is great, but it also protects your town against the coastal flooding. So it incentivizes proactive communities with these NFIP discounts. And look at the number of communities that participated. 1,500 participate in the program. Let's go back one more time. 23,000 towns participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. Only 1,500 communities participate in the CRS Rating Program. How it works is your town will accumulate points. The more points you accumulate, the bigger reduction on your flood insurance in the town. You can go as high as 45%. There's only, I think I can count on one hand the number of towns that have a class 1 and a class 2 rating. Maybe class 2 has more than 5, but it's definitely no more than 10 for class 2. So to put it in other words, less than 5 towns have a class 1, less than 10 have a class 2 here, and there's 1,500 communities that participate. It's hard to do, and that's done on purpose because the federal government wants to make sure that if we're giving out these discounts, it's for a good reason. It's so we don't really have to pay out the flood insurance in the first place to begin with. So what are the SFHA zones. There are special flood zones here. So if you're familiar with your flood zone areas, A, AE, B, AO, and AH are all involved in this program. Let's talk about what you can do to get these discounts. And there's a whole manual with all of this information. I'm going to briefly go over. It's a combination of public information activities, mapping and regulations, and that's a lot of points. So is the flood damage reduction in the warning and response. So the majority of the points here is by actually doing things, doing things that directly mitigate the flooding. Now that's a total of 12,654 points. You might say, Joe, let's go back again. What happens here? You only need 4,500 points to get a class 1. How come there's only 2 towns that do it? Well, let me show you where the challenge comes in. This is what on average towns, or the maximum possible points any town has gotten for something like this. So there has been one town that has gotten 4,368 points for their mapping and regulations. They're probably a class 1, to be honest with you, but it's very hard to do so. So that's 9,506 total points. Let me show you what the average, no, actually I don't have the average, I apologize, but the average number of points that people are getting are way less than this, because a lot of this, especially as you get higher and higher to class 1, it takes more and more work. So here are some ways to get discounts. I just wanted to give a couple of examples. You're pretty much adding up. It's a lot of addition here. It's not like there's really one program that's going to give you 2,000 points off the bat. It's a lot of these little programs here that will get you up to that point. So wanted to show you some selected CRS ratings. I used Avalon in this case instead of Atlantic City because Avalon is right here in New Jersey. Them along with Seattle City both have class 3 discounts. At the time when I wrote this piece about Avalon getting it about a year ago, there was only 11 towns with a class 3 discount, and 2 of them were in New Jersey. So they're doing a lot of things like this, making sure homes are raised. So the regulations are in place that's saying you have to raise your home, making sure that there's a way to get out the message of a coastal flood advisory, coastal flood warnings to all of its residents, even their part-time residents, pretty quickly. Boston, on the other hand, does not get any discount. It's a class 10 that they are not involved with the program. Norfolk, Virginia is a class 7, so they're doing some things and getting a 15% discount. Just to give you an idea, in Avalon, there's 40,000 part-time seasonal residents in addition to the full-time residents. They're saving $1.8 million amongst the homeowners. So there's not 40,000 homeowners in Avalon, but there's 40,000 people. Maybe you want to do the math, say 10,000 homeowners, 1.8 million divided by 10,000. It's a nice chunk of change for all the homeowners there. So we're going to wrap it up here. I appreciate the time. Again, you can follow me on social media for the latest. That's AC Press Martucci under Twitter and TikTok. I'm really trying to build up that TikTok right now. So if you're on TikTok, give me a follow. I'll give you a follow back. I'm still learning how to exactly do these stitches and duets. We're getting there. But if you go to the link that's right there, Linktree, really spells out linktree.com. Or excuse me, linktr.ee. I don't even know what .ee means, but linktr.ee/Joe MartWX. A lot of what I talked about is in there. Just scroll down to the bottom, and there's links to the National Weather Service, the River Forecast Center pages. There's links to the Stevens Institute flooding. There's links to how you can actually see the flooding on your specific block. I have a how-to video on how to do that. So there's a lot of good information there. And you can always, like I said, you want to give me a shout on social media, you have a question about coastal flooding, more than happy to help. And of course, people over at WeatherWorks, including Nate, who's introducing me here, can give you some more information as well. So I appreciate the time, everybody. Hope everybody's enjoys. Hope everyone has a great summer ahead. Looks like things are pretty close to normal now, which is good. And maybe we'll talk again in the future. And if it's somebody that I've spoken with over the phone in my time at WeatherWorks, it's good to talk with some familiar faces. So take care, enjoy, and thanks to Nate again for the time.